really, really excited to be here, and thank you so much for the invitation to come speak, and for all of you for being here today. I'm going to speak a little bit about how I got into filmmaking, what I'm trying to do with my films, and then touch on just 2 of my most recent projects. But first I have to start with this woman. She's sitting right down here, Christina Mittermeier. You're going to hear from her later on today. I think it's safe to say that I'm here because of her. So if any of you want to be a mentor, I strongly suggest it. So I started working with Christina when I was 21. I was digitizing her slides. I was her field assistant, and then I started working for the International League of Conservation Photographers for about 5 years. And Tui is here, one of the originals. So I grew up in this conservation photography filmmaking community with some of the best communicators out there. And I saw from a very early start in this career that multidisciplinary communication collaborations are just so important to do when you're trying to communicate these very difficult conservation messages and trying to get it to as large of an audience as you possibly can. So this is the first time I picked up a video camera. This was about 2 weeks after I had ever picked up a video camera, and this is in Madagascar. Christina needed a video about her using a SONY camera, and she mentioned to them that her assistant could do filmmaking, which was a surprise to me. So this is one of those amazing moments when you realize that this is probably something you want to do for the rest of your life. And I had this lemur here to keep me company. So since 2012, I had this amazing base to just leap from, and I've been a full-time filmmaker since then. So I've gotten to travel all over the world, never been to India, so it's very exciting again to be here. Christina and I are going to go photograph and film after this festival, so we're reunited. So it's another very, very cool thing. So this is one project that I did in Namibia about human-wildlife conflict. So a lot of the work I do does involve this intersection between humans and wildlife and landscape, and how we can try to tell this story by involving the people on the ground who are being affected by this. And we heard about that a little bit earlier today. So that's just something that's very imperative to do, use those voices. So a lot of the wildlife work I've done has mostly involved a human voice as well. So this is one of the most recent projects I worked on. It's in Churchill, Manitoba. It was for World Wildlife Fund, and they wanted us to talk about polar bear conservation. This is something that has been covered a lot. So the challenge was, how do you find a way to communicate this message in a new way? It was a messaging piece, very short, 5-minute piece. So I pitched using my 11-year-old niece as this vehicle to try to describe what we're trying to describe, which is just trying to get people to care about something. So the idea is to bring the magic back into it, have it be from a child's perspective, and remember why we care instead of just hitting people over the head all the time with negative messaging, which the negative messaging is imperative because that's what's happening in the conservation world. So I'm not dismissing that at all, but it's nice to be able to balance that sometimes. So this is just a very quick clip from that film, and what's happened before this part in the film is that the little girl, Lara, has been asking a lot of questions. You know, who were you when you were my age? What did you care about? What were you like? And then when did you forget? When did you forget to appreciate this place? And then it switches into, and when did you remember? So it gives the audience the benefit of the doubt. But here we go for a quick clip.
Is it seeing a polar bear? Feeling small in big landscapes? I think this place is so beautiful. Do you think these things are worth protecting?
So that was, Lara running around in the tundra. She sees a polar bear for the first time, and it hopefully is trying to capture the magic of that, just that experience being out, appreciating these places. And then, of course, putting the viewer in the hot seat saying, do you think it's worth protecting? And then from there, hopefully they act. So that's one of the things I'm trying to do in these films, is get people to care, to react, to act, whether it's just sharing the story with a friend or on all the social media platforms, or actually changing an action that they do. And that would be one of the best things. The next project I'm going to talk about is in this landscape. This is Yellowstone National Park. another very storied landscape. I think that almost everyone knows Yellowstone just because it was the first national park, and they have a lot of preconceived notions about it. So if you're trying to tell a new story, you have to break down those ideas that they already have and present them with a new idea that's almost as appealing. So I worked with 3 other people on this project. We were in the field, I was in the field for 3 months. The scientist, who is the top left next to me, he's been working in Yellowstone for almost 10 years, so he knows this landscape in and out, and he's been collaring elk, and he's been tracking their migration routes. So that was his goal, was to create this new map, this new scientific data for the community and for the world at large to consume. And what he did was he put a lot of his funding towards visual storytelling as well. So I was the filmmaker. We have a painter and a photographer. Joe Reese is the photographer who's right under me, and he did mostly camera traps, photos, and video. And then James Prozac is the artist, and he's a contemporary artist. He's well known in the more New York extravagant art world. So we brought all these different audiences into the project as well. So here's a quick clip. One of the things we are trying to do is redefine how people think about migration and connectivity. And when I thought about elk, I knew what an elk was, of course. I'd seen them my whole life, but I never thought there was anything all that impressive about them until I went to Cody and saw this. Again, that's just a quick clip, but this is Cody, Wyoming, not the Cody that Ian was talking about. But these elk, they go straight up and over these mountains. They're almost 14ers. I mean, it's incredible. It's by no means the longest migration. It's just a very impressive migration. They're very, very sort of rugged animals, and they do this with very, very young calves or very, very pregnant. So it's an intense process that they go through. This is Arthur Middleton. He collared 9 of the elk herds that come into Yellowstone, and we followed one migration from start to finish. So we started in the ranch lands outside of Cody and went all the way into the Yellowstone National Park. And we used horses and mules, and then when the mules couldn't go because it was too rough, we backpacked ourselves. So this is his map that he made. So you can see the borders of Yellowstone National Park and how all these herds start outside the park. So they're starting in ranch lands. They go through BLM, the Bureau of Land Management lands, state lands, national park, national or forest, service land, and private land. So they go through all of these different land designations. So it's going to take everyone there to help preserve this migration route. For an ecosystem that depends almost entirely on these elk, it's really important to note that they're only protected for half the year. So that was his aha moment as a scientist, and so he's doing his PhD at Yale. He has all of this, the academic world behind him, and he's publishing papers right now. And then we have James Prozac, the painter. So he brings in his world, and he went into the field with us, and he's talking about the connectivity between the animals in that same ecosystem. So he's saying if he paints a trout, he's actually painting an elk because they all are interconnected in this very small, in terms of the world, but large ecosystem in terms of how we think about connectivity. So this is one of the elk that he painted. And he's against naming wildlife because he thinks that we're dependent too much on how we define wildlife. So he creates these paintings. If you see, he has those numbers next to the silhouettes of the birds, and usually that would have a key on the side of the museum, but he doesn't give you a key to drive the audience wild, but also make people realize that we are very dependent on how we define wildlife, and maybe that's restricting how we try to manage it. So because of James's involvement, we had this exhibit. So now we have, the academic world, science, magazines, articles, we have the exhibit, so we're already getting this content out way farther than I could have or a photographer could have alone. So this is from our Instagram feed, and it shows some of the adventure element. So that's what I came in to document, was this adventure of following the elk from Cody, from the ranch lands into Yellowstone National Park. So this is Arthur, the scientist, and Joe, the photographer. Along the way, we met a lot of other people. This is Lee and Wes Livingston. They kept us safe when we were walking blindly into grizzly bear country. I think it's, again, talking about working with people in the community. These people know the elk migration like the back of their hand. They didn't quite realize the extent of it, perhaps, but they have been guiding, whether it's backpacking trips or hunting trips, their whole life. So having these people behind us was huge. This is Rosie, actually, in the foreground. This is our favorite mule. This is Joe Reese setting up a camera trap. And when we were looking at the elk migration at the maps, we looked at these sort of the points where the elk were having to all go in a single file line because of the landscape around them. So that's where we know to put the camera traps up, these sort of linchpin points, and they were often in passes. So this is going to be a quick clip from the film Elk River about Joe setting up a camera trap.
Looking for Joe's cameras. He had 5 cameras up here. The last one has gone missing. Seems like some elk or a bear came through and knocked a lot of these cameras around, and we found the other ones. Can't find this one. Is that a lens sticking up down there in the mud?
Yeah, right in the creek.
That's not good.
Way to go, Joe!
I didn't think I was gonna find this one. It's probably the first bump. It eliminates the front lens element. But, I mean, it's either we put it on the cliff and take the risk of getting amazing elk migration footage, or we don't do it.
Yeah.
And we decided to do it. We'll clean them up and see if we can get them back out. We might have to just do without that.
Just do it without that.
That front. All right, we better get moving so we can get over to Needle, which is not even in sight at this point.
So that shows some of the challenges that we were facing. Joe would set these camera traps up and then go and check them, see something wrong, like a bear getting it within hours of setting it up, and have to set it up again, go back and check it. So it was definitely an ongoing process he did for 2 years. This is Joe Reese's image. And so this is what we're trying to do, is show what migration looks like. And I think that having a camera trap is one of the only ways to do that. Or I have a clip later on in this presentation that shows another situation where he's photographing, but this is something that you've never seen before, in theory, I hope. So this is how you can redefine how people look at these animals. Again, trying to incorporate some humor is another thing I really like to do when I'm telling these stories. So I was lucky to work with these characters completely. I mean, that was all verite, right? I didn't script that. They just talk like that, and so it was a fun project. These are just some examples of how we've tried to extend our reach. So a lot of you already know these things, but we have the website, we have speaking events. The film has gotten into several film festivals and will hopefully continue to circulate in the film festival circuit. You know, Facebook, Instagram. Because of Joe's work and Arthur's science, we were featured in the May issue of Yellowstone. And then I had some of my footage and some of Joe's on the online version of that. So again, bring it back to a singular person, had the scientist tried to do this on his own, he couldn't have gotten any of this reach. I mean, he could have gotten a lot of it, but that partnership is really important. So I think extending it even to painting, and then the musicians that we worked with were very engaged in this project too, and so they're promoting it through all of their channels. It's been very cool to see it grow like that. So I think I'm going to leave you with one more clip. This is the river crossing clip, and this is the closest I've ever been to an elk, and being out there in the world, you start to really appreciate these things. So we sat by the river all day long. They cross in the morning and at night, so perfect light, which was great. But that's where you have to be very careful of the bears because they can't hear you, and they are all grizzly bears. And they're all eating at this point. So if they won't necessarily come and get you, but if you surprise them when they're eating, I don't think they wouldn't take that very well. So we were sitting by the river all day long. We're walking back to camp, and we see a very fresh elk calf kill right behind, like from me to Christina, the first table here. And so it was very clear that there had been a bear with us that whole time.
Other than my camera traps, this spot is as close as I'll get to the migration. Capture that vulnerable moment right when they cross the river. Feel lucky, super lucky.
Thank you. Oh, one other point I wanted to make really quick. The previous slide when I showed all the different places where we were trying to get this story out, having all those different outlets you can tailor your messaging and the length of the film, the amount of photographs to your audience. So that gives you just a little bit more flexibility so you don't just create one product that you're hoping that everyone understands and can interact with, but you can really make it specific to where it shows up. Okay.
Does anyone have any questions for Jenny? Thanks a lot for the lovely talk.